It took all day, and some thought it wasn't going to happen at all. But we have a Daytona 500 winner. We have crowned a Daytona 500 champion. And after a weather delay that seemingly took upwards of 8 to 9 hours, after multiple wrecks, including one that took out half the field before the race really even got underway, and then a vicious wreck at the end that changed the complexion of who would end up winning it, Michael McDowell ends up the victor and wins the 2021 Daytona 500. His first, a very young driver, in fact, getting his first there on the Cup Series. So he starts off his year with a big win and gets that ring on his finger. We do not get to see history made. We get to see the end of a dynasty rather than, for the first time ever, a 3 consecutive victory in the Daytona 500. Denny Hamlin not able to do this for what would have been his 4th overall and 3rd time in a row. That would have been the first time ever. He led a lot of the way, so we'll get to that in a moment here, but fades the last probably 20 so laps and really didn't have a chance. Michael McDowell, though, the winner. I'm your host here, Mike Asti, and this is kind of the introduction of racing talk here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, and of course now part of Pittsburgh Postgame here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Bottom of this video, click that subscribe button, help us get all of our content to you, and I will be joined now by Scott Stiller, who runs Pittsburgh Racing Now. He's a part of the Pittsburgh Sports Now family, and this is the Super Bowl of NASCAR, and unlike the Super Bowl and many of the championships across sports, this kind of kicks off their year. And what a wild asinine, but a interesting and kind of fun way to have this anyway, as Mike McDowell does win the Daytona 500. Scott, I appreciate you staying up all day with me here, and as we weren't sure we were going to get this done or not, I appreciate you staying up. But first off, what are your takeaways from Michael McDowell individually winning this Daytona 500? Certainly an underdog story, certainly not who many would have thought would have won this. His name didn't even get on the broadcast until the final minute and a half, and he certainly is fortunate off of that wreck at the end. But what does this say about him? What does this say now about his season and him as a driver, still very young in his career? And he has an accomplishment that took, like, for example, Dale Earnhardt, who they were celebrating the 20-year anniversary of his unfortunate passing away at the Daytona 500. It took him 90% of his career to get one of these, and Michael McDowell gets one very early in his career.
Well, I think could be a career-changing win for Michael McDowell, and as important it is the victory is for him, it's huge for his team. Front Row Motorsports is one of the, you can call it, underfunded teams in NASCAR. It's one of the smaller teams. It's not a Hendrick Motorsports. It's not a Joe Gibbs Racing. It's not a Stewart Haas Racing. They do get some factory support from Ford, but it's kind of like a second-tier team when you look at it. So this is huge for them. This type of victory and this type of purse that they walk away with gives them the ability now. It locks them into the playoffs for this year, which is huge because he's going to be one of the 16 cars that's going to take part of the playoffs. So the last 10 races of the year, that's millions of dollars at the end of the season. And you can't undervalue how much that kind of money means to a smaller team. It gives them the ability to go to the wind tunnel. And that's really where you make these cars faster.
Absolutely. And again, Scott Stiller here of Pittsburgh Racing Now. As we recap the Daytona 500. Michael McDowell, your Daytona 500 champion here. Mike Asti on Pittsburgh Postgame here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. How did he do it, though? He was not brought up the entire way through. He almost just stabilized himself and stayed in there, but was 20 cars back within the last 40 laps of this race. And then you see that wreck at the end. It seemed like Logano was destined to get this victory after Denny Hamlin eventually faded. It was most of his team there in front that was going to bump him, but then all of a sudden you see that gigantic wreck. So how did that wreck occur? What kind of happened there to ruin this race for that team? And then how did Michael McDowell get in there, or honestly, and the ring still looks the same, the championship still counts the same, and the money's going to count the same. Was this a rare pure luck championship?
I think it was one of these situations as far as the wreck goes. I think what happened was McDowell was behind Keselowski. So McDowell was pushing Keselowski,
right,
and Keselowski had the run, and Logano went down the block, and he just made his move a split second too late, and they made contact in an awkward spot. Keselowski and Logano did, and then it was like the seas parted for McDowell. It was he just drove right through the hole there, and then the caution flag flew because of all the cars that got caught up in behind it. Yeah. And McDowell happened to be in the right place at the right time. Now, how he got there goes back to the final round of pit stops when Denny Hamlin and the Toyotas were up front leading the race, and the Fords all of a sudden en masse pulled down, led by Kevin Harvick at the time. They hit pit road for their final round of pit stops, and McDowell was part of that crew of Fords that all went to pit road at the same time. So I think that was a manufacturer coordinated effort, conversation amongst all the teams. We're going to come now. And they all stayed together. And that is really what enabled the Fords to leapfrog the Chevys and the Toyotas to get out front after the final round of pit stops.
And an upset for Fords as well as Michael McDowell, with the Chevy being that make and model that usually wins the Daytona 500. So kind of a surprise all the way around there in those final laps. So you're giving him some credit. Him and his team certainly deserve some credit. It's not just pure luck to have to make this happen and to get that victory. Scott Stiller again of Pittsburgh Racing Now, Mike Asti here, as we talk NASCAR here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Michael McDowell's Daytona 500 victory, a rain delay, a 10-hour delay, a crazy day, but nonetheless, he ends it as the winner of the biggest race of the year, the race that has the most points in that chase. And that championship is the most important thing, but this Daytona 500 race and this win is really what is the most synonymous with a driver and something that has to be accomplished and for the Hall of Fame and all of that. And at 36 years old, gets this Daytona 500 win kind of out of nowhere, an amazing thing there. Now, not to take this away from Michael McDowell because he got the victory. We certainly opened the show up with him. It makes sense. He's going to be the headline for many. But unfortunately, he doesn't carry the name cachet of some others. So we got to get to Denny Hamlin and company, who entering this race, certainly a favorite, winning the last 2 years, winning 3 of the last 4. But Jeff Gordon talking the entire broadcast, I can't believe everyone else is not trying to just get rid of him, not try to hurt him, but try to almost crash his car to get rid of him. It didn't really happen. He just eventually faded. How did Denny Hamlin stay in front most of this race? Because he did lead the first few regions and end up setting a record with consecutive regions led and all of that to join more history, when he was clearly a target that it seemed like nobody could stop him and he almost was destined again. And then what happened to cause him to fade out? Because it wasn't because of a wreck. He just seemingly lost steam.
Well, I think one of the things was he was very aggressive when this race restarted. And if you remember early in the race when that big giant lap 14 accident happened, Hamlin actually dropped to the back of the pack because he did not like how aggressive everyone was being that early in the race. Being the veteran driver that he is, he knows that in order to win the race, you got to be there on the last lap. Lap 14 doesn't really matter. So he faded back a little bit. And then when the race restarted after the rain delay, he was very, very aggressive. I think he figured with half the field gone from the big crash, I think he figured, you know what, I'm going to jump out front here. And the best place to be is out front. Then he had a couple of Toyota teammates working with him. And Bubba Wallace Denny owns his car with Michael Jordan. Right. So they kind of worked together there, the Toyota camp and the Joe Gibbs Racing camp. And he obviously had an extremely good car. Now, what happened to him at the end was simply just bad timing. The Fords, when they went to pit road at the final round of pit stops, they came off pit road almost nose to tail together. And that's crucial with the draft at Daytona. The Toyotas pitted a couple of laps later. And here's what happens in that situation. The Toyotas get split up a little bit. And when you have 4, 5, or 6 cars in a tight draft, they can go faster. And what happened is the Ford stayed nose to tail and disciplined the whole entire time. Toyotas come off pit road. They were a little split apart. Yeah. Took them maybe about half a lap, 3/4 of a lap to get lined up. And on a 2.5-mile track, that was the difference. The Fords just freight trained them. And what was interesting there was right after the Fords came, the Chevrolets came. The Chevrolets knew we need to get to pit road. So Austin Dillon, Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, they came off pit road together. And by the time it cycled around, the Fords came past, they were able to hook up to the Ford train. And they ended up, let's see, it was 1 through 5 with the Fords. And then it was 6, 7, and 8. And then 9, 10 were the Chevrolets, because Chip Ganassi's Ross Chastain was the last car in that pack. And then the Toyotas pitted. And when they came back, because they weren't lined up nose to tail coming off of pit road, he got freight trained.
Denny Hamlin, one of the favorites, certainly already a Hall of Fame resume. Bubba Wallace, another favorite from the same team there. Michael Jordan certainly brings a winning spirit to that team, as he now hopes for more success as a NASCAR owner than what he's dealing with right now in the NBA as an owner of the Charlotte Hornets. But it just wasn't in the cards eventually. And you could hear even on the broadcast, as much as you could hear, they were trying, it almost appeared, and from, those of us who do this, who try to keep viewers, they were trying to keep the casual fan that, hey, Denny Hamlin's still around, he maybe could do this, when Jeff Gordon kept interrupting the broadcast and saying, if he doesn't get to at least 8, he really doesn't have a chance. He never really got beyond 10 in terms of that top 10, and then faded even further away even after that wreck, whether he was involved or not. Bubba Wallace, the same thing. So he lost the guy that would have helped him, or he could have helped, vice versa. So it just didn't end up working out for them. And again, Michael McDowell able to end up being the lucky man there, but certainly off his hard work as well, and getting that Daytona 500 victory. Scott Stiller of Pittsburgh Racing Now, Mike Asti here, as we recap the Daytona 500, a full day of the Daytona 500 with a rain delay, with an early wreck that took out half the field, a wreck at the end. We did not get the photo finish. It delayed our broadcast because I'm sitting there saying, I don't want to go on until we know who actually won this, because they couldn't give the big speech. There wasn't the big call that you would normally have after a championship, because it wasn't clear. So some steam popped out, but I doubt Michael McDowell and his camp really care right now. What I do want to ask you, though, because this is going to be the story as well, and when you bring up what happened early on in the race with 16 cars being taken out and that changing the mentality for Denny Hamlin and him being upset at that, it seemed like that happened 6 years ago at this point, since that was so long ago. Was it the right call for NASCAR to race this tonight? I mean, we're doing the show now at almost 1 a.m. East Coast time. Certainly not a benefit for TV viewership. Certainly not a benefit for marketability. They probably lost most of the casual fans in terms of watching this. They could have moved this till tomorrow, which I know from us talking is what you thought was maybe going to happen. They usually don't want to do that, though, because of the workday. You rather have the weekend. But after such a long rain delay and a slick track early on, that was an issue even early on once they restarted things, was it the right call, based on how this race unfolded, to continue this and to start this? They started it at 9 p.m. that night after originally a 2:30 p.m. start time. Was that the right call, or should have they delayed this to the next day?
I don't know why they didn't delay it until tomorrow, considering tomorrow's President's Day. Right. A lot of people have tomorrow off. They could have started it at 4 o'clock, which would have been 1 o'clock Western time, and 1 o'clock Western time.
Yeah, 3-hour difference, right?
And 4 o'clock Eastern time, and they would have gotten a considerable audience. The only thing that probably may have changed that is when the TV partners interject that, well, if we started at 9, it's 6 o'clock on the West Coast.
Right.
So they still have that they still have the West Coast audience. It'd be interesting to see how much of the East Coast audience they actually hung on to. But if I was NASCAR, being that there were so many laps left in the race,
Yeah.
I would have delayed this until tomorrow, especially considering tomorrow, or actually today now, is a holiday.
Yeah.
So I don't know that they made the right call, but really, Mike, it brings up an interesting issue of starting time for these East Coast races.
Yeah.
Back when Bill France Jr. ran NASCAR, before Fox got involved, back when it was CBS and ESPN, they followed the NFL model for starting times. 1 o'clock for an East Coast race, 4 o'clock for a West Coast race. And that was just the way they did it. And I actually think that's one of the reasons NASCAR ratings have actually been hurt the last 5 or 10 years as their popularity hit its peak and then started to go back down, was they don't have a consistent broadcast time. And they're all over the board. And TV is dictating this, driving this train, when in years past, Bill France said, no, this is when we're going to start it. This is how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And really, take a lesson from the NFL. They understand it. Take that 3 hour, make your races a 3.5 hour window. Start it at 1 o'clock. People on the West Coast are still going to tune in. It's Sunday. They do it for the NFL. They do it for all the other major sports. So starting it at 2:30 got them into this afternoon of typically in Florida, you get an afternoon shower when it's a hot and humid day.
Right.
And this has affected the Daytona 500 now the past couple of years. That you've had rain. They rain delayed it to a Monday a couple of years ago. So I really think it was a bad move by NASCAR to restart this race tonight. And, ultimately we'll find out tomorrow when the overnights come out exactly what kind of rating they had. And it'll be interesting to see what they had before the rain delay and what they had starting at 9 o'clock.
Because everything was in NASCAR's favor, regardless of the ratings of the past few years. There's no football today. You have a Valentine's Day holiday. It's a global pandemic, so people you would figure are less likely to be at restaurants, maybe having that dinner with their loved one at home. There's nothing really else going on. Yes, the NBA, the NHL, and different leagues were playing, but it wasn't like there was a major high-profile game. LeBron did not play until tonight, so you would have avoided him altogether. Instead, you're going head-to-head with LeBron James. It just seemingly didn't work out ratings-wise. And, of course, TV and the sports leagues, they care more about the East Coast generally than the West Coast. People argue about an East Coast bias. There really is one in terms of a TV market. This was a decision that certainly favored the West Coast. Maybe they figured, even with President's Day, a Monday afternoon or even a Monday evening just in general was worth. Maybe they forgot it was President's Day. I don't know. I was very surprised that the race ended up happening and that it was restarted at 9 p.m. I assumed that once we got past 7:30 that it was going to be tomorrow. I kind of closed my brain off to it, and then all of a sudden I see that it's happening. So that was definitely a surprise, but it ends up being able to finish. I think Doomsday would have been if they restarted it and only got half of it in and it was an official win, but it wasn't the full race. At least getting the full race in maybe avoids those critics chirping too loud. Scott Stiller of Pittsburgh Racing Now here. Mike Asti, Michael McDowell, the winner of the 2001 Daytona 500. A surprise, an underdog story. We don't get the explanation point on a dynasty. Denny Hamlin does not win 3 in a row, which would have been the first time ever. And at the very least, his pursuit of this has really added cachet to his name, because when you think NASCAR, you certainly think Jeff Gordon, you think Dale Earnhardt Sr., you think Dale Earnhardt Jr. of this era, maybe Michael Waltrip as well. Now Bubba Wallace has got a lot of fame the last couple of years. But Denny Hamlin's kind of this quiet, mild guy. He just goes out there and wins. He doesn't get marketing. He doesn't really get endorsements as some others would get. Because he was in this pursuit, even though he didn't end up winning, what does this do? What is the legacy for Denny Hamlin even right now? And his career is not over by any means, but 3 out of 4 back-to-back pursuing this 3 in a row that didn't end up happening. But to put it in perspective, Dale Earnhardt Sr. took him 20-plus years before he won his first. Junior had to have some runner-up before he was able to win. Jeff Gordon won too early, and then it took him a long time to even get back into contention. It's hard to win the Daytona 500. It's that important. And to have 3 out of 4 and back-to-back, it's really Tom Brady stuff that's not really getting national recognition. Does him pursuing 3 in a row, even if he fails, get him that national recognition? And do you expect him to now maybe get more endorsements, maybe get more money, get more accolades, also with Michael Jordan singing his praises throughout the national broadcast? It's a different marketing campaign now around Denny Hamlin, even though he lost, but just being there and now everyone knowing what he was pursuing.
Well, I think in order to get to that tier that you're talking about with Michael Jordan, Denny Hamlin needs to win a championship. Right. And he hasn't been able to do that. And what he was best known for prior to winning the couple of 500s that he's won the past few years was dumping Chase Elliott at Martinsville in the playoff race a few years ago, where he clearly slammed into the back of Elliott's car and launched him into the wall, which really did not sit well with the NASCAR fan base. You know, they love good, hard racing, but they also like clean racing. You know, it's okay to bump a guy. It's not okay to dump a guy. And there's a very fine line there. But I think what's happening with Hamlin now is he's just one of these amazingly consistent guys who's there week after week. He can win on a super speedway. He can win on an intermediate track. He can win on a short track. And he showed that last year. Him and Kevin Harvick were the 2 dominant cars. He just wasn't able to close it out with a title. And I think when he gets that championship, for him, it's going to be that much sweeter. But I also think it's going to be icing on the cake to a Hall of Fame career, because when you mention him going for his 4th 500, he's in rarefied air there because, you know, you're talking Richard Petty type of numbers in that race.
Yeah, and you have to have the championship to go along with it, especially in an individual sport. It is only the first race, granted the most points in that pursuit of a championship. That is the end goal, and there's many that have won the 500 that have not claimed a champion. There's many that have been champions that have not claimed a 500. But if he can manage to do that, then it's really a plus on that resume, and it's probably surprising for some to look at that resume and see where it is, and even his age, you could keep on beefing it up. He being so consistent and his age, it's not out of the realm of possibility that he could approach the 7 500 victories. He's going to always seemingly be in contention every single year. Scott Stiller of Pittsburgh Racing Now, Mike Asti here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Again, bottom of the video, hit that subscribe button as we recap the Daytona 500 and Michael McDowell's victory. Now, we talked about Denny Hamlin, we talked about Bubba Wallace, and we talked about their team, because that was certainly the team that we'll discuss going into this race. Others were certainly involved there, Logano and company. Who out of this race, besides Michael McDowell, were you impressed with that you expect to really have a chance at a championship this season? Because certainly Michael McDowell has the most points right now, but it was an underdog story, hadn't claimed a victory to this point. I would still say Vegas money is probably not on him winning the championship, even though he would get into that playoff. So yes, he won it. Yes, that's a situation for him. But what are your thoughts now in terms of a prediction of the field going into this season now, based on who was successful in this race, even if they didn't actually claim the ring in the championship?
Well, very quiet second place finish today for Hendrick Motorsports' Chase Elliott. He's the defending NASCAR Cup Series champion. He now leaves Daytona second in points. And what's interesting about that, Mike, is that this is the first Daytona 500 that Chase Elliott has actually finished on the lead lap without damage to the race car.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And that's something to watch going forward, because next week they race in Daytona on the road course. He won that race last year. And on the Busch Clash earlier this week, he did finish second, and he had a chance to win the race. I don't know if you saw any of the highlights we had on our story over at Pittsburgh Racing Now, but he essentially dumped him, and Ryan Blaney made contact in the last turn. Blaney had smoked his brakes at that point. He didn't have any brakes left, and he took a really wide arc into the final turn and left the door open for Elliott, who sailed it in there. The two of them made contact, and Kyle Busch ended up winning the race. Elliott finished second. So Elliott's definitely going to be a favorite going into next week's race on the road course, which actually takes the place of the race that usually happens in California, but they moved that because of the pandemic. So you're going to have back-to-back races at Daytona, the oval today on the 500 with McDowell getting the win, and next week's race, which will be a points race, will be on the road course. And Chase Elliott a couple weeks ago ran the Rolex 24 Hours of Daytona in a sports car, so that gives him all that much more experience at that track at a place he's already won. So I think, he gets out of there next week with a victory or a top 5. He's sitting pretty going into the third race of the season as far as points go. And really, all these guys want to do is they want to stay in that top 8 or 9 of points by the time you get to the cutoff race with 10 races before the 10-race playoff starts. So if you can consistently run top 5s, top 10s, you're going to put yourself in good position to make the playoffs if you don't get a win. Wins automatically lock you in.
And as important as the Daytona 500 is, as we talked about earlier, it is all about winning that eventual championship for the overall season. That is the eventual goal for all these drivers out there, not just this one race, even though this one race puts you into racing history, and that's the race that's really remembered most of the year, which is why it's outstanding that Michael McDowell has that already to start what is still a young career with so many Hall of Famers that didn't get to that point. And Tony Stewart in particular comes to mind, that he now has that, and yet still many other drivers thinking that they can have a chance at that championship this season. Denny Hamlin, another one of those that comes to mind. We talked about him trying to get that elusive championship to add to his 500s. He didn't get enough there in terms of his finish in this race, but he's always a contender. So it's not like you can totally erase him from having an opportunity this year either. Now, Scott, Denny Hamlin obviously has had the success individually. Bubba Wallace has been kind of that next guy that they're trying to promote within that team. He certainly has had success as well. There's a young contingent now at NASCAR, even with Jeff Gordon's retirement and him now being in the booth. And there's a lot of drivers out there that certainly can be a part of the future of this sport. Michael McDowell maybe being that guy as well, Logano, etc. But what does it do for the sport, barring that they have any rain delay or any issues TV-wise or anything like this that kind of ruins their prestige moment, of having somebody like Michael Jordan being a part of an ownership group for a team, especially a team that has a 3-time Daytona 500 winner on it, and Bubba Wallace, who maybe is that young next up-and-coming driver that could easily win any given race day, and having Michael Jordan a part of this. What does that do for the sport? We know Joe Gibbs going from the Pro Football Hall of Fame to being a part of a team, having success there. Others, celebrities, have done it. Pitbull is also part of an ownership group. But having Michael Jordan's involvement, what does that do for NASCAR?
Well, it's interesting because Michael Jordan got involved. Denny Hamlin had been working on Michael Jordan for years to try and get involved in an ownership role. And what ultimately happened was when NASCAR banned the Confederate flag last year, and then Bubba Wallace, they had the noose incident at Talladega where the garage door pull was shaped like a noose.
Yeah.
And the way the racing community got behind Bubba Wallace at that point, those were two of the key factors that really swayed Jordan into getting involved in ownership. And he said that that was one of the things that at that point in time, he saw a maturity in Bubba Wallace. He said, and he saw a change of philosophy with NASCAR and their leadership, which really opened his eyes, because let's remember, he went to North Carolina. He grew up down there. So he knows what old school NASCAR was all about. And even in the height of their popularity, in the 90s and early 2000s, when Jordan easily could have gotten involved in ownership, he needed a couple of things, a couple of boxes to get checked in order for that to happen. And him throwing his support behind a young African-American driver like Bubba Wallace is really what I think pushed him over the top, to be able to help this guy who's been in underfunded rides to this point. Now he's on a team that Jordan co-owns with Denny Hamlin. They're getting all of their equipment from Joe Gibbs Racing. So I think what happened today with Bubba Wallace, he ran in the top 10 all day until he had a vibration at the end after the final pit stop, which is typically a loose tire. And that's where young teams make mistakes, Mike. It's just they don't have the experience of the established teams to make those pit stops error-free under pressure like that. So a little bump in the road for those guys today, but I think Jordan's going to look back on their first venture and their first race as a very positive outcome. They've got some very high-profile sponsors lined up: DoorDash, Columbia, McDonald's. They've all jumped on board to help. So I think, what'll be difficult for the team is it's just building that experience, building that notebook of notes. What does Bubba need in the car to accentuate his talent and to make that talent rise to the top? So that's going to be an interesting storyline all year long.
I was surprised of Michael Jordan's racing knowledge. He certainly appears like a very knowledgeable guy to the sport and claims to have loved the sport, and him and his father loved the sport. And we knew the relationship with him and his father over the years. That's been well documented. So to have a guy like Michael Jordan certainly has the funding, certainly has the interest, certainly has the winning spirit to be involved with a winning team like that. And Denny Hamlin, an individual already with a Hall of Fame resume, looking to put that final stamp for a championship for him. And then Bubba Wallace up and coming. It almost seemed destined to maybe have him win a big race with everything that you mentioned that's now involved with him, that him getting close in the past when he didn't have all of that and all the obstacles against him makes this even more likely that he eventually snags one. It seems like a perfect storm in terms of a team to watch out for, and certainly a team that's going to receive media attention. I mentioned earlier the Denny Hamlin with 3 500 wins. I'd imagine most casual fans probably didn't know that before today because he's not in commercials. He doesn't get the cachet that, say, Jeff Gordon got in the 90s when he clipped off a couple of victories. But having Michael Jordan will certainly help that. That's why he was sitting with Michael Strahan on those sit-down interviews leading up to this race and during the weather delay, is because Michael Jordan's involved, not just for him. Fair or not, Michael Jordan certainly adding that attention to him, to the sport, and helping everything be marketable. So certainly great for the sport to have somebody like Michael Jordan involved. They certainly would benefit from having this on a more of a Eastern prime time slot than having this end at 1 a.m. But nonetheless, NASCAR gets the Daytona 500 to completion. They run all the laps they need. They don't have to cut this short. And they end up with Michael McDowell as the Daytona 500 winner. Now, Scott, here as we close up shop, what are your final thoughts? Mike McDowell gets the victory. Denny Hamlin does not win 3 in a row. Bubba Wallace has a great day despite fading at the end. Denny Hamlin also has a solid day despite fading at the end. We have that wreck early on that takes out some big names. We have the wreck at the end, so we lose the photo finish. We have the switch from Ford overtaking Chevy. We have the switch of cars. We have Logano leading at the end and then losing out because of a crash. A lot going on. 16 different stories you probably could write about this race right now, and all different angles that continue to move off of this one day of NASCAR. So maybe that's a positive for the sport because it's going to get attention just for how weird it was. But what are your final thoughts from the 2001 Daytona 500? Michael McDowell, the winner. It starts off a season that still has a lot of hype and a lot of intrigue in terms of Denny Hamlin looking for that championship, Bubba Wallace looking to win a big race. Will Michael McDowell be able to actually snag something else and make this more than just a fluky 500 win?
Well, when I look at it, Mike, I look back at lap 14, the accident that happened, and I think to myself, why are you beating on one another so early in this race, trying to win the race on lap 14? It reminded me, I tweeted out to one of our Pittsburgh Racing Now Twitter followers years ago. I was covering a race in Michigan, and on the first lap, somebody sailed it down into the first turn and tried to go 5 wide and took out half the field. And one of the drivers that was taken out was Dale Earnhardt Sr. And when CBS finally caught up to him on pit road, they're like, "Dale, what happened?" And Dale said, somebody went down into turn run and wrecked half the field. And he kind of looked at the mic. He goes, tell them dumbasses, you don't win the race on the green flag. You win it on the checkered flag. So that came back to me on lap 14 today. And that was a interesting dichotomy because, what kind of race do we have if even a third of those cars aren't taken out in that? Some very high profile cars taken out there. And then you have this massive rain delay where you're scratching your head saying, why is NASCAR restarting this race?
It popped the balloon a little bit in terms of interest in this race happening.
Absolutely.
Tonight. Yeah.
It lost all the momentum after 8 hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not even an exaggeration. It really was. It was 2:30 all the way to 9 p.m. And it wasn't like they really started at 9 p.m. It was more of a 9:15, 9:30 type of thing. And then you see another wreck at the end. It was almost a fitting throw your hands in the air, ass nine way. Okay, at least we got this done and somebody's a winner. But it kind of definitely popped the balloon. Maybe there will be some media attention and national attention just because of how weird it was. So that's better than no publicity. But the ratings probably were not what they would hope. And certainly you lose so many stars early on. Denny Hamlin does not end up being in that final run of that top five and having a chance at the end. You have the major delay. It just was a perfect storm of probably what you didn't want from marketability standpoint.
Well, and they ended up with dumb luck success, let's just say.
Because that's what it is. Yeah.
They get the rags to riches story of Michael McDowell getting his first career win at the Daytona 500. And if he doesn't win, Chase Elliott's their winner. They're defending champion. So no matter what happened in that scenario after that last lap crash, NASCAR still comes out with the storyline that'll get some play on Monday morning. In addition, you're going to see all the accident videos pop up all over the place tomorrow, the lap 14 accident and the final accident. For some reason, people are still impressed with that. And, I like to see racing. I like to see guys side by side, like we see every Friday night at Lernerville, a handful of guys all fighting for the win. That's what makes racing great. And you want that kind of drama. And this race certainly had it. But NASCAR somehow comes out with rags to riches storyline that they can market going forward. And they also have their defending champion sitting second in the points, who just happens to be the most popular driver, who's the son of a 16-time most popular driver and a champion in his own right, and Chase Elliott's dad, Bill. So right now, NASCAR's they've got some nice storylines lined up to go forward from here. But I just couldn't believe it. I still can't believe they restarted the race so late. We'll have a full recap over on the website, and then we'll have some 500 notes that we're going to follow up with during the week. And we still got the Pittsburgh Racing Now podcast. Our guests this week are going to be Ross Chastain and Kurt Busch from Chip Ganassi's NASCAR team, and AJ Flick, who is the defending 410 sprint car champion at Lernerville. So we're excited to get the green flag really rolling on our season.
Yeah, and honestly, it popped my balloon a little bit to see the race end on a wreck like that. As much as that's going to get social media play, it kind of was like, I'd like to have a photo finish, certainly after everything we've been through all day long. But yeah, some people will enjoy that. It's also interesting that you lose so many cars early on in a wreck where it seemed like drivers were intentionally trying to take out the field, and they don't get Denny Hamlin. He's able to coast through and almost gets in contention toward the end. If anyone was going to do that, Jeff Gordon, he was even saying on the broadcast, I probably would have tried to get rid of him. I don't want 3 in a row. Try to get rid of the guy that's going for history as a competitor, but he stayed in there. Certainly, there are tons of stories, tons of intrigue that are still going to be around for this season now. You get an underdog rags to riches story. If you can't get an exclamation point on a dynasty, what else do you want in the world? You want an underdog story. So you get that underdog story with Michael McDowell, luck or not, winning the Daytona 500. Scott, I know you're going to have a lot on your site, tons of stories just off of this race alone. And unlike other sports, for those who don't know, this only sets up your season, as this is not winning a championship necessarily. This is a championship for the Daytona 500. You get a flashy ring for it. You're remembered forever, but it's really about what happens throughout the season. and the path and pursuit of a championship for the overall sport, something that, say, Denny Hamlin and others who won the 500 have not yet done. And we'll now see what happens moving forward now with an underdog story right now as the leader in points is somebody that many probably hadn't heard of prior to this victory, with Michael McDowell getting his first Cup Series win at the Daytona 500. And hopefully weather holds up moving forward because you're sticking in Florida. So hopefully the weather holds up and the TV charade that ended up occurring this race does not occur again. Scott Stiller over there at Pittsburgh Racing Now. You can find all his post-race coverage over there at Pittsburgh Racing Now, as well as his coverage throughout the weeks coming up as NASCAR's 2001 season now getting underway with Michael McDowell, the points leader, as he wins the 2021 Daytona 500. So his first win ends up being for the Daytona 500, as big as a win you could imagine. We do not see the first three-time consecutive winner of the Daytona 500. Denny Hamlin, a three-time champion, does not win 3 in a row, having won the last 2 years. So that history does not occur. Kind of unfortunately, I kind of wanted to see that, but still a lot of intrigue and storylines moving forward for all of us throughout the Pittsburgh Sports Now family of networks. Of course, for Scott Stiller of Pittsburgh Racing Now, and of course, for Pittsburgh Sports Live, I'm Mike Asti. Micah McDowell, your Daytona 500 winner. It took a while to get here. The balloon might have been popped a little bit, but nonetheless, a very intriguing race. It will now play into a very intriguing season, and an underdog rags to riches story wins the Daytona 500. So we do not get the exclamation point on a dynasty, but we do get an underdog story, and now that will play into what could be yet another interesting season in NASCAR.
Mike, thanks for having me on. How rare is it you get a